I went into therapy right when I met my ex-husband because he was so nuts. Not ever thinking that I would have this mission of helping women leave trauma bonds. It just emerged.
Parties, the glitz, the glam, and then there's always what's behind closed doors.
I wasn't dealing with a very normal person. I was raised by a single mom who was very into psychology. So she turned me on to Freud and Jung at a very, very early age. A lot of times we're blaming the women. The research shows different. So there's a lot of misinformation out there. You can recover from a toxic, dysfunctional relationship. You have to really go on a journey of rediscovering who you are. But it takes time, and it really starts with you turning the mirror back on you.
How do you find love again and trust again and find the right person?
If you're drawn to people that are larger than life and charismatic, you have to.
The big silence. It's time to sing.
All right. Welcome to the Big Silence podcast, Dr. Nadine Macaluso. I am so excited to have you. Dr. Nadine has a PhD in somatic psychology and a book out called Run Like Hell, which I'm very excited to dive into and talk about it, and especially with narcissistic personality disorder. But first, so you're from Brooklyn. And you commented on my Instagram post about dancing. So what was it like growing up in Brooklyn?
You know what? Brooklyn in the 70s was the most amazing place to grow up. It just was. My childhood was very carefree. There was no social media. There weren't all these crazy phones, right? And the internet and everything that we were dealing with. It was just much more like you went out on the street and you played.
Same. Yeah. I mean,
right?
That was, yeah. Isn't that so interesting growing up when you just went on a bike ride? Your parents didn't know where you were. You just went and you played and you had fun and it was free.
And it was fine. And we all, came home in one piece and it was great. And I was raised by a single mom who was very into psychology. So she turned me on to Freud and Jung at a very, very early age. So we were always talking about feelings and psychology. So that's really where the seeds of psychology got planted into me.
I found you because I rewatched, what is the movie? Sorry, I'm like blanking.
The Wolf of Wall Street.
Yeah, Wolf of Wall Street. Duh. What am I doing? Duh, everyone's seen it. I watched it back in 2013, and then I was just, it's winter and the Christmas tree is on, and I'm just like chilling at home. I was like, let me rewatch this. And I watched it, and I was like, what is Nadine doing now? And I Googled you, and I was like, oh my gosh, she's a psychologist, which is so interesting how then you got into psychology and, in the work that you do now, helping others with what your experience that you went through.
Yes. And I would have never imagined that. I went back to school at 39. I mean, I met my ex-husband when I was a baby, baby in the woods at 22, and we'll go into that. But I went back to school at 39. I was meditating a lot, living in Manhattan Beach. As you know, we talked about that, and drinking green juice and doing yoga and doing all the things.
All the Manhattan Beach
ballet thing too.
Yeah.
And I said, I've been in therapy my whole life because I went into therapy right when I met my ex-husband because he was so nuts and our lifestyle was so insane that I was like, I got to get into therapy. And so I realized that therapy had saved my life. And so I went back to school to do it, not ever thinking that I would have this mission of helping women leave trauma bonds. It just emerged.
That's interesting too. I know I got back into fitness as part of my healing. And then I was like, let me share that on how fitness can be so healing. And I love the fact that you went back to school at 39, because a lot of women or people might think, well, no, this is just where I'm at.
Yeah, no. And it's, and that's why I always say the age that I was. And then I got my doctorate. I finished at 45. And now I'm 56. My birthday's Christmas Eve. I'm going to be 56. And, I feel like I'm just hitting my stride, right? So to all of those listeners out there that, we got to get rid of ageism.
Mm-hmm. I agree
You
with
know,
that.
you can go back and do things at an older age.
Yeah, and I've been having a lot of those conversations too with guests or friends and about having career shifts or just major shifts in your life as you hit 40 or what, and how it's okay and it's amazing. You can keep going and keep doing and keep reinventing. So I think that's very important. Let's go back to Nadine at 22.
Yes, yeah. So at 22, so because I was raised by a single mom in Brooklyn and I didn't grow up wealthy at all, so I needed money because my parents weren't exactly like, footing my lifestyle. And so I became a model, not because I wanted to do it. It was just I literally needed money to live. And it made sense. I was close to New York City. And so I started to do that. And then when you go and when you're in the city in the winter, then you go to the Hamptons in the summer. That's just kind of what happens back east. And I went to the Hamptons just as the movie showed. And I went to this party on the beach. And I walk into this big house and there are all these people on Quaaludes that I had no idea that they were all on Quaaludes. They were acting really strange. And I said to my boyfriend, something feels off here.
Yeah.
And and that's how I met my ex-husband, just like the movie says.
Yeah. Was the movie pretty accurate? Because I know you didn't
Yes.
write the script because your
No,
ex did.
but it was from Jordan's narrative. It was
Yeah.
very accurate. Like even a scene where like one of those guys exposes himself to me, like that really happens. And that made me leave the party.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I was like, okay, this is weird. I need to get out of here. I don't feel safe.
So you're in this relationship, you get in there, and coming from your mother was very big into psychology and you learned so much. So why do you think you were attracted to this person?
So I was 22, he was 28. He was so handsome. I grew up in Brooklyn. He grew up in Queens. We both came from, more, maybe he was a little bit more middle class than I was, but very similar socioeconomic status. We really understood each other. And he's beyond charming. I mean, the most charm. When he wants to turn it on, he turns it on.
Mhm.
And he did. And he pursued me, and the love bombing was insane. And it gives new meaning to the word love bombing. He set me up, he paid someone $15,000 to have me meet him. And this woman kept asking me to go out. And I was like, this is so weird. Why does she want to go out with me? But they set it up and we went out. And honestly, we just got along.
22 and all the fun that you must have been having, the parties, the glitz, the glam, and then there's always, what's behind closed doors, and then all of that. And how long were you married?
So we were married for about 7 to 8 years.
Yeah.
22 at 30, I left him.
Without going into too much of that story, you can go watch the movie if anyone hasn't seen it. But
10-year anniversary.
Yeah. Now you're an expert with dealing with narcissistic personality disorder and love bombing and trauma bonding and all of this. So the one thing I want to start with is now, as you've learned so much, how do you recognize if you're in a relationship with someone who has NPD?
Well, there's a few different ways that you can do that. But, I have a trauma bonds assessment on my website. And what happens in this sort of relationship is that you'll feel something called intermittent abuse. So when you're with someone who has a personality disorder, because I call them pathological lover, I don't just say narcissism because I think narcissism is too light. It's too light of a term. And intermittent abuse is where someone's, let's say, nice maybe 40% of the time and helpful and generous and kind, but then 60% of the time they're cruel, selfish, and controlling. So it's that mix of those extreme behaviors that actually creates the bonds in a trauma bond. And so when you start to fall in love with someone, as you start to fall in love, if you quickly feel confused, if you notice their words aren't matching their actions, if you notice they want to monopolize your time, if you notice they have the same exact interests of you as you, right? So there are certain things that you start to notice slowly. These are the red flags over time that emerge because initially they usually wear a very good mask.
Right.
Of being charming, confident. The word con man actually comes from confident.
Oh.
Okay?
And that's is that also the love bombing portion?
Yeah, the love bombing is so much attention, so much admiration, a lot of words like, you're my soulmate. You can't be somebody's soulmate 2 weeks in, right? You're the love of my life. You're the air I breathe. I can't live without you. Those are extreme words to use within a month of meeting someone. Now, we might feel infatuated and we might have a lot of dopamine and oxytocin running through us, and it might feel exciting, but that doesn't mean this is your soulmate.
Right. And I have some friends who have dated men who, are as we are talking about right now. And they're like, well, of course I'm amazing. Of course why would I not believe him when he says all these things? Because I believe that of myself. So someone who has confidence.
Also, you have to remember when I met Jordan, nobody was talking about this.
Right.
We didn't know love bombing, trauma bonds. Even when I was in therapy, my therapist back then wasn't saying to me, oh, you're in love with a narcissist. We just didn't talk like that.
And how smart of you, even back then, going to therapy when therapy wasn't what therapy is today, to know that you needed to go there. So what back then would a therapist say was going on and to try to help you heal? How was it different back then?
I have a lot of thoughts about this, of course, today, now being a therapist. I wish my therapist would have been a lot more direct with me and said to me, what the hell are you doing? But she didn't. She was an excellent therapist, and she was really helping me more manage the situation and connecting me back to myself, and actually, kind of supporting me and setting my boundaries. But there was no talking to Jordan. It didn't matter what she told me to do. I wasn't dealing with a very normal person.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll give you a quick example. My daughter was 2 at the time, and I wanted to really be a parent to her, and it was hard to, the terrible twos. And my therapist said, well, why don't you tell Jordan you need him to parent with you? And I said, okay. And I went back and told him. He's like, I can't do that. I was like, well, that didn't work. Right. So, but therapy was great because it did just, I think, keep me grounded and solid. And I didn't just totally fall apart.
So then you go through this relationship, which was traumatic, and then you go through your healing process. And for someone who's had a similar relationship, and I believe this could be romantic, friendships, business partners, there's so many ways, but how long is it to heal, or do you ever heal?
Oh yeah, you can recover from a toxic, dysfunctional relationship. And I think it takes about 2 years to really kind of find your footing again, because you have symptoms of loss of self, right? So you have to really go on a journey of rediscovering who you are and learning about yourself, because when you're in that sort of relationship, you're so focused on the other person.
Yeah.
Right. So like, what are they doing? Where are they going? Why are they saying that? And responding to them and trying to please them and walking on eggshells around them. So I think that you do recover, but it takes time, and it really starts with you turning the mirror back on you.
Yeah. I've had some relationships like that, and it takes time to, you're so used to, well, when we go back to, you were talking about the different percentages of like this percentage that they're really nice to you. And then this is when they're abusing you. And then that always pulls you back in. So into that relationship. So I think it's important and you're like, oh, okay, well, they're being so nice to me today. It's okay. Things are great. But yeah, the healing process of then getting used to not calling, not talking. And like when you are in, for you, for such a long time, 7-8 years, it's a lot to let go of a relationship of someone who is such a big part of your life. And for you, the father of your children.
Of my children. Yeah. And, and the research shows there's an assessment called the 5-factor model of personality, or the Big Five, and it measures people's personality traits. And I write about it in my book. And the research shows that women who score very high in agreeableness as a trait, or conscientiousness as a personality trait, often these men are drawn to them and these women stay trapped easier, because these women are very pro-social, very loyal, very tolerant, and have real integrity. They think that they can make things work, right? So That also, that's why it's very important to understand your personality traits, understand your attachment patterns, understand how you're wired for love, so that you get to understand yourself. Like, why did I stay? And not to ever blame the victim, right? Because we certainly are victims of a controlling, abusive person, but it's good to understand yourself so to never fall prey to that again.
Where can you find that test?
It's called the 5-factor model.
Okay.
And I give it to every single one of my patients that comes. But actually, I have it on my website
Okay.
right now. It's drnade.com. And it's called the 5-factor model. And I connect everybody to a site called Brain Manager,
Okay.
where you can take the test. It's about 240 to 300 questions. And then in 20 minutes, they give you your results.
Okay. So if you're listening, go to the show notes. We're going to find it on your website and link it there.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. And it's important to know because, and that's one of the reasons why I wrote my book, is because a lot of times we're blaming the women. So I've already felt so much shame for enduring a relationship like that, right? And everybody was like, "You're so codependent." And then, no, I'm not really. Like the research shows different. So there's a lot of misinformation out there.
And you started writing your book in 2010, correct?
I wrote my thesis in 2000.
Your thesis. Okay.
Yeah. And that got me writing about my relationship, because I think writing is another way to process, right? Pain.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's why I wrote my memoir. I was just like,
You did. Okay.
yes. It was just more of like just letting it out, right?
Right.
And releasing. That's why journaling is so important as well.
Exactly. That's why journaling is so important, for sure. I started to write this a few years ago because after I opened my practice, so many bright, kind, beautiful women were coming in married to these pathological people. And by pathological simply means mentally unwell.
What percentage of women actually get out of that relationship and run like hell?
Yeah. Well, it takes 4 to 7 times to leave. Women attempt to leave 4 to 7 times. And that's a good thing. I don't know the statistic actually on that. So I never give information that's not research-based. But I will look that up. What I do when I work with someone that's in a trauma bond is I'm with them in it.
Yeah.
They're just, when they want to leave, it has to come from them.
Yeah. Can you explain the exact definition of trauma bond?
Sure. So a trauma bond is a toxic, dysfunctional relationship that has 2 conditions. The first one is intermittent abuse, which I explained earlier, which is the mix of the kindness and the cruelty in the extreme amounts, in the extreme experiences of it, which actually bond you to the person. And the second thing is a power imbalance. You have to have a power imbalance within the relationship where one person has the power over the other person and abuses it. And they also have power over the person usually because they've instilled fear into the person by intimidating and dominating them. So it has to have those 2 conditions for it to be a trauma bond. But the perpetrator or the pathological person will use, exploit, lie, or betray or hurt their partner to get their needs met for money, power, pleasure, and status. That's it. You are a tool on their tool belt.
They can delete you and they don't need you anymore and you're just gone. You're like a file on a computer. Trash.
Yeah. Or I say that like there's like a conveyor belt of women and they just take them off.
Yeah.
Right. Because we're objects, we're not subjects, we're not people.
Right.
And that's why they can exploit and use and betray and lie and not have remorse or compassion even when they do those things. It's very, very painful situation, a trauma bond.
And so you were a senior counselor, and they told you that if you don't leave this relationship, you'll get cancer.
Yes.
Let's talk about that and about the stress on your body and what you're going through.
Yeah. So, when, trauma is, the very definition means wound, but trauma is any situation that overwhelms us, right? And we don't have the resources to deal with it. So there's a shock trauma like a car accident, a tsunami, or there's relational trauma, right? Which is what I experienced. And you can experience it as a child too. But the thing is that when you're experiencing constant stress, what happens is that you get highly inflamed, which affects your immune system, right? which affects your whole physiological self. So do I agree with what that woman said to me? I think that was a little harsh, but it did shock me to the point that I was like, oh my God, I got to get out of this. I mean, I was obviously leading up to that point, but that kind of was the thing that snapped me.
So someone listening who's in this relationship and this many years later, how do you feel? And are you able to find love again and trust again and find the right person?
That's the hardest part. One of the hardest parts is not even just trusting another person, but also trusting yourself to make the right decision. That's why you have to do a lot of work on yourself, because then you have to build up the confidence to be able to date after you've been decimated. But there are green flags to look for too, you know. And when I first met my current husband and we started to date and we had a disagreement like all relationships do, and we started to get into some conflict, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I hear you." And I was like, "What? This cannot be possible.
Yeah.
You hear me? You hear me. Okay." All right. So big green flag. Or he wanted to do something with the house and I set a boundary and it was like, no, I really don't want to live there. He was like, okay. I was like, oh my God, I could set boundaries.
Oh my gosh, my opinion matters.
Yeah. Or, I was sick and he was taking care of me and he could meet my needs. My needs weren't ignored.
Yeah, versus someone saying, like, you're not really sick. Just go do this. Go take care of the kids. Go, why aren't you doing,
Exactly. Exactly. So those were some real, like someone can hear you, someone can allow you to set boundaries, someone can take care of your emotional needs. And then slowly but surely, trust has to be earned. We can't blindly give it.
What are the top 2 red flags?
Well, there's a lot, but the top 3 is definitely when you try to, the first one is when you try to set boundaries. And like my ex plowed through my boundaries.
Oh, just get so upset at you. Like, how could you do
So
this? Like
yeah.
this. Yeah, I've had that. Yeah. Not
Right. But just gets really plowed through my boundaries. Also, extreme anger out of nowhere. Just like it could be not, I could think it was nothing, but the rage and the fury that would come at me was like a tsunami. And I didn't really understand why. And I think substance abuse is a real red flag.
Yeah.
Words not matching actions.
Yeah.
Right. Those are the 4 that I would really look for. And trusting your gut, not overriding, this doesn't feel right for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what about co-parenting with an ex who is a narcissist? And, and even having children and yeah. I asked that because I have a really close friend who was married to a narcissist for 17 years and she's out, but she's got 2 teenage kids and co-parenting, and it's really hard.
Co-parenting can be hard. I was very lucky. It was not that hard for Jordan and I, surprisingly. But when I work with people in regards to co-parenting with somebody like this, who always needs to be right, always wants to win, actually gets jealous if they think the children love you more or give you more attention. I mean, all of these crazy things is, again, to be connected to your authenticity, because you don't want to please them, but you don't want to rebel against them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You want to just keep coming from your authenticity and putting the kids first, because the children were not asked to be born. They are here and it's your job to protect them and do it the right way. And a colleague of mine, Dr. Christine Corciola, if anybody's struggling with this, she has a beautiful program called Protective Parents. And you can find her on Instagram or on the web. And that's really her area of expertise. And it's important to get expertise when you're dealing with your own children.
So can we talk about somatic psychology and exactly what that is?
Yes. So somatic psychology is really, as we know, we talk a lot in therapy, right? As Freud called it, the talking cure. In somatic psychology, we're really also listening to the body. We're connecting our patients to the body. We're reading gestures. So we're really including the body in the clinical encounter and taking it into consideration, because the body doesn't lie, or as Bessel van der Kolk, beautiful book, right? The body keeps the score. And so we're bringing the body into the clinical experience. We're not just listening to the words.
So what does that mean exactly?
Like, I could be working with somebody and I will be talking. All of a sudden, I'll see their eyes go to the right. They won't talk during that moment. I'll say, where'd you just go? So I'm tracking their physical movements, and they'll usually tell me a whole thing that we would have just skipped over. Or their foot, like they're in therapy and they're talking the whole time, their right foot's tapping. And I'll say, if your right foot could talk, what would it say? Right. Or they'll be in the moment in therapy and they'll tell me something they're feeling, and I'll make them pause or ask them to pause and say, where do you experience that in your body? Let's be with that.
Yeah.
And let's see what emerges. So we're always connecting back to the body as a resource and as a point of information.
Oh, that's great. I know I've been in therapy before, and a therapist's like, where do you feel that? I'm like, right here at my throat. Like, I feel like I can't speak. Like, it's tight. And that was one of my biggest things, overcoming, is having a voice and being able to speak truthfully and speak up for myself. And
Is that why you named your podcast The Big Silence?
well, the big silence is, it's about mental health and self-development. So yeah, it's all the things surrounding mental health, the stigma, having a voice, and
that makes
just
sense.
all the things that you don't, in the past, don't want to talk about or didn't talk about, or the stigma was, too much to talk about. And growing up with a schizophrenic mother, we never talked about mental health or mental illness.
Oh, yeah, especially back then. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And that's, I'm sure that was very challenging.
Yeah. So big silence is just about making noise and talking about anything and allowing that voice.
And that's, one of the reasons I wrote my book too, is to break the stigma even around toxic relationships. Right. Because a lot of the time the trauma bond's victim is isolated and doesn't want to talk.
Because of shame, embarrassment.
Shame,
yeah. And it's not your fault, and you just have to, in my opinion, unprofessional opinion, but you just have to learn about yourself and what you're kind of drawn to. And this comes up. I have some community questions, and it kind of goes into this. One question here, it says, how do I stop attracting narcissists in my dating life?
We're all taking the blame. And there's a beautiful book by Lindsay Bancroft called Why Does He Do That? I highly recommend it to anybody who's struggling with narcissistic people in their lives. And abuse is always the fault of the abuser.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if you're drawn to people that are larger than life and charismatic and extraordinarily confident, they also might be carrying things that you're not carrying so much in yourself. And so a good tool is to get curious about that. But I don't ever blame the victim for, like, you fall in love, and I write this in my book that anybody and anyone and everyone does fall prey to people like this.
So this is an interesting question here. After dating multiple toxic narcissists, how do you stop being bored in a normal, healthy relationship and detach from toxic patterns?
Yeah, I had that last night in a group call. This is a very common theme. Yeah. Well, I guess you have a choice here to choose drama over peace. And I think that boring is good. That doesn't mean that you still don't feel excited and you don't feel in love, but it's very hard to have a good career, be a good mother, be a good friend, even if you're constantly dealing with a dramatic person in your life, because they're all consuming.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
All consuming from the moment you wake up until bed.
So kind of really looking at your own self-talk and catching yourself when you're saying I'm bored, right? Like changing the conversation to I'm embracing the peace in my life. It's okay.
I know, it's okay. And I've had a couple of relationships that have gone away this year, and people around me are like, you feel really light. And so that's one of the things that once you get through that relationship, there's this lightness and more calmness, and you're not constantly anxious.
Right. And I always say your peace is priceless. As you sure it gets better. I
I
promise.
know. Just, yes, maturity, getting older, understanding
Yeah.
people. You learn your boundaries as you grow, and it's really important. So, another community question. People love this. I've got two more here. Do we think narcissists actually are capable of love and caring for you, or is it usually just another game and another victim and they move on to the next? We kind of touched on this already.
Yeah. I mean, again, I don't use the term narcissist, so I'll switch it to pathological person. Listen, I'm the biggest believer in love. I spent my life studying love, right? Good love, bad love, healthy love, unhealthy love. So I think it's what makes the world go round. I think life would be meaningless without relationships and love. And some people are not capable of it. Some people are not capable of it because if you think about it, when you love somebody, not only do you hate to see them suffer, you're certainly not going to intentionally make them suffer.
Yeah.
And if somebody is intentionally harming you, not having remorse, not having compassion, not having accountability, they're not capable of love.
Do you think that's because something in their childhood?
Lundy Bancroft says it this way. I'm going to talk about men specifically living in the patriarchy. They feel entitled, they feel superior, and they don't have a moral compass. And that can be from having too much love or too little love.
Right. So if your parents like love bombed you and you were a perfect child, you got everything you ever wanted. And so then you have this
Sense of entitlement. Yeah.
entitlement. Yes.
Yeah. And then if they didn't and they emotionally neglected or abused you, then you have a hole that you're looking to fill a lot of times with outside things. I mean, I'm saying it very simply. And then also, if you're living with a dominating, intimidating, threatening person, which is control is at the bottom of a trauma bond, it's a lot of times it's learned behavior from their home.
I know that most likely they aren't going into therapy. So, I mean, have you ever had someone come to therapy for you? Because you're more on the female side of women
Well,
leaving.
I worked with men that listen, like I always say, I wouldn't be a therapist if I didn't think people couldn't change.
Yeah.
And I have seen men with more borderline foundations
Mhm.
change because they do want to bond and they do love. They just have a very dramatic and erratic way of showing it. But yeah, I have seen some people change. But again, you have to want to change, as you know.
Yeah. And change is very hard and a lot of work.
And if this person is getting all their needs met for money, power, pleasure, and status, they have no motivation to change.
I'm learning a lot more in my relationships as an adult. I'm 42 now, and I realize these friendships that I even had, and and that comes to the last community question here. How do you stop making friends and attracting narcissists in a friendship? A relationship is great, but I'm making poor friendship choices.
Yeah, I think you have to look at your values and what do you value.
Yeah.
Sometimes some friends can just be a lot of fun and they could be a great people to go out with and social, but they can be very draining, very demanding, right? Or they cannot just be the best listeners and be supportive of you and validating. So I think it's like going back to your values. There's a lot of value exercises all over the internet. And I think I sent one out about Christmas and creating your own traditions. As adults, we get to figure out what are our values and do we get to experience those values in our friendships? And if we don't, then we have a choice to make, as it sounds like you made this year.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, good for you. Good for you. That's not easy.
I'm just a little old boring Karena at home now.
And you know what? It's probably nice. And here's the thing, and I want to say this. I've been studying relationships now probably my whole life.
Yeah.
Right. I got my master's, got my doctorate. I even took a 2-year postdoc training on a somatic theory that's all about developmental trauma. Relationships are very tricky. And nobody teaches us about them.
Right.
We go to school to learn reading, writing, arithmetic, right? The other R we need to learn about is relationships. What is a healthy relationship? What are boundaries, right? What is a healthy connection? And so that's why I love being a therapist, because that's, and of course it impacts my life because I like having healthy relationships, right? And it's really important.
We should be teaching our children that. Like that should be a course. I'm always an advocate of teaching children about mental health, self-talk, confidence.
That's right.
And I've worked with NAMI, National Alliance of Mental Illness, and gone into schools teaching about mental health and signs of yourself or a friend. Like these are important things to teach the kids, because when I was growing up in 80s, 90s, and no one was talking about it, and mom is schizophrenic, and I attempted suicide, and but no one I'm just happy I'm here. And this is why we do the work that we do now to make the change. But we need programs in school. I never thought about just relationships.
Yeah, just relationships. They are the most complicated things in the world. Luckily I have a beautiful relationship with my children, and my grandchildren now. Well, they're babies, but and my husband, it takes work, and it took me to be fully educated to really learn how to do that. And I was blessed to grow up with a mother who had instilled that into me, right?
Yeah.
So that it wasn't weird for me to go to therapy, 30 years ago. But that is why you and I are even having this conversation.
Yeah. Even with my husband, once we got together, he started doing therapy, where he in the beginning was like, no, but he's learned what a gift therapy is, and that therapy, you can do preventative therapy, or if you're having an issue, and learning that disagreements in relationships are okay.
They're going to happen, right? We don't teach people that rupture and repair are inevitable. And how do we do that? And so we're so programmed by our childhood unconsciously. I always say, and then God played this trick on us. Then we have to spend the rest of our lives undoing what was done to us. But we're worth it. We're worth it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you, Dr. Nadine, for this conversation.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad we got to do this.
I am too. And we will put everywhere to find you in our show notes, and make sure you get the book, Run Like Hell. It's a very important message, and a lot of people need to read it.
Yes, yes, yes. And I put my heart and soul into it. And it was the hardest thing I've ever done.
Because you probably had to go back to some of the emotions of the past as well.
It's a hard topic to write about. It's not exactly butterflies and rainbows and unicorns. And also meshing all the research.
Yeah.
Because I tell it through story, through 4 different couples, right? So people don't fall asleep when they read it. The stories keep the clinical aspects alive. So it was just hard, but I'm glad I did it. We can do hard things.
That's right. Everyone out there, remember that we can do hard things, and you are not alone.
The big silence. It's time to sing.